Hi guys, you'll have to excuse me for the slightly shoddy lighting. It's Scotland and that's very apparent from the weather outside, but I always prefer to work with whatever nature is providing. So as you can tell from the title of this video, the topic, the reason that we're here, I wanted to share with you the 10 classics that are top of my TBR. I did a version of this for non-fiction recently and it was really fun and interesting to sort of have a look at my shelves and think which non-fiction books I wanted to make priorities, which ones I was most excited about, and then also hear from all of you on what you thought of them, whether you'd read them or not, and sort of get some feedback and some encouragement. And I wanted to do the same for classics. I definitely think I've been reading a few less classics in recent months and I would like to change that because there are some that have been on my TBR for quite a few years and I can often discover some new favourites through the classics. These are all specifically pre-20th century classics. I felt as though there could be a whole separate top 10 for modern classics and there was plenty of pre-20th century classics, that those two things should be separate. So let me know if you want a 20th century classics TBR. In the meantime, however, like I said, all of these are the pre-20th century classics that I am the most excited for and want to read for one reason or another. So without further ado, let's crack straight in. These span all the way from antiquity to the 1800s, so yes, let's have a look. First up, I had to start with an obvious one because it's a Jane Austen, and this is Sense and Sensibility. I have read 3 Jane Austen novels. I've read Northanger Abbey, Mansfield Park and Persuasion. Really struggled there for a minute. Persuasion, and I haven't read her other 6 novels, which are Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility and Emma. Although I've seen adaptations of all the stories, I feel at least vaguely familiar with what happens in them, and Sense and Sensibility is my favourite of her stories that I've experienced on the screen. I love the BBC miniseries adaptation of this book. It's one of my absolute favourite Austen adaptations of all time, but I've never read the original. So although I really want to read Pride and Prejudice and Emma, I'm saving Pride and Prejudice for last because I feel like that's the one I've seen the most on the television, and therefore it would just be interesting to go for last. I would like to go for Sense and Sensibility next because I love the adaptation so much. I'm hoping this could be my favourite Austen because it's surely just going to be better than the adaptations. I have loved all of the Austen I've read so far. She has a real way with words and her books have remained classics for a reason, so I think I'm going to love this, and I do want to read Emma as well. I loved the recent Emma film adaptation, the most recent one. I thought that was fabulous, but Sense and Sensibility is sort of top of my Jane Austen TBR, so it also had to make the top 10 classics TBR for sure. We then have a slightly cheeky one because it's more of an author than a specific title, and that's Euripides. Now the reason I'm mentioning Euripides in general is because he was an ancient Greek playwright from the classical period of ancient Greek history. That's what historians refer to it as, and he has the most surviving ancient Greek tragedies. So there were other writers obviously, and we do have others surviving, but we have Euripides in the greatest number, and it is a goal of mine to read every play attributed to Euripides, even if they have sort of in more recent years been sort of disputed in their authorship. I still want to read everything that has at some point been attributed to Euripides, and I'm quite a way through. I've read more than half of them. I have read quite a few, but there are always seemingly one in each of my collections I haven't read yet, so I picked these 2 off the shelf because I know I haven't read at least one in each of them. This one is an older edition from Oxford, which includes Alcestis, Heracles, Children of Heracles and Cyclops, and from this one I haven't read Cyclops. I'm not 100% sure if I've read Children of Heracles either. I'm going to need to double check because sometimes I get just a little bit confused about which one is the plot of which, because there is a lot of overlap between the tragedies. But the Cyclops is particularly interesting because it's actually the only surviving satyr play by Euripides. Now tragedians would have written all of their tragic work, but they would have also written these satyr plays, which were sort of comedy that would follow on after their tragedies, as a sort of palate cleanser you could call it. And I've never read Cyclops. It's the only surviving classical satire play, so that makes it even more interesting, and I do want to read it. From this collection, this is also the one that I most recently picked up, and it includes Ion, Orestes, Phoenician Women and Suppliant Women, and I have never read Euripides Orestes, so I really want to pick up Orestes from these. But there's definitely a few others I haven't read that are scattered around in other collections I have, so generally speaking, want to get to Euripides, but I'd probably say that Orestes and Cyclops are two at the top of my list at the moment. In fact, whilst we're on the topic of ancient literature, I'll just carry on with that theme because there are two more. The next one is Aristophanes, and this is a little bit like Euripides in that I'm probably cheating a little bit because basically I want to have read everything Aristophanes did. He was a classical comedic playwright from ancient Greece, and I've read quite a few of his comedies as well because quite a few survive, but there are a few that I haven't read as well. So this collection, for example, is the most recent one I think I picked up because I was trying to fill in the gaps in my own collection, which includes Clouds, Women at the Thesmophoria, and Frogs. Now I've read Clouds and Women at the Thesmophoria, but I've never read Frogs, so would love to get to Frogs because it's also probably one of his most famous ones. It's referenced a lot in other ancient literature and I would like to pick it up. Then for Latin literature, yes, I have included the Romans in this video despite my preferential treatment towards the Greeks as a Greek historian, is Platos. This is 4 comedies by Platos. So Platos was a comedic Roman playwright. From what I understand, he was working during the Republic, so pre the Roman Empire. The sort of little blurb on this book tells me that he lived between 254 and 184 BC. Like, Roman history is not like my area of expertise, especially the Republic, so I'm very much going on what this book tells me, but I've always wanted to try Platos. I do actually quite enjoy Roman comedy, like the comedic literature from Roman writers that I've read in the past I have really enjoyed, and I generally just want to have read as much classical literature as possible, so I did pick up this copy of Platos a couple of years ago when it was on sale, and I want to get to it and have tried his work, basically. That's all like I can say on that really, but it should be really interesting to try a new Roman author that I haven't read before. Moving away from antiquity though, I have some 16th century literature, and yes, you have guessed it, it is Shakespeare. So I think in total I've read 6 Shakespeare plays, and he's just an author, again, who I would like to have read more of. I've really enjoyed the majority of the 6 plays I've written by him. I don't just want to read him for the sake of it, like I have enjoyed what I've read of him, but I also enjoy just sort of like being a little bit more familiar with someone who gets referenced so often. I think it is really interesting and it fills in gaps for me in conversations and in other literature that references his work. And the one I think I'm most interested in picking up next is Much Ado About Nothing, which is a comedy. I'd really like to read more of Shakespeare's comedies because the comedies I have read by him are quite entertaining, and I have read more of his tragedies than his comedies, so I'd really like to check out Much Ado About Nothing, and I have a physical copy of that one, although to be perfectly honest there's quite a few others that I'm really interested in. I'd really love to read Timon of Athens, I would really love to read Antony and Cleopatra, which I've never got into, so there's quite a few, particularly his ones that reference classical and ancient history and mythology that I'd like to check out, but I definitely think Much Ado About Nothing is probably the one that I will read next because I have this physical copy and I'm really interested in his comedies, and this one gets a lot of praise from people who enjoy Shakespeare's work. We're really just jumping backwards and forwards in time here because I then have The Elder Ada. So this I believe is actually an anonymous piece of literature. It is a collection of myths from the ancient North, later than the ancient Greeks and the Romans. I believe specifically medieval Icelandic, so Norse, Viking, this is not my area of expertise, but I would really love to have read more medieval literature. I'd really love to learn more about sort of northern mythology from sort of like Icelandic, Norse, Scandinavian cultures that I'm not as familiar with. I know my Greek myths inside and out, but I am certainly nowhere near as well versed with other cultures, and this is again one that I feel like is referenced a lot in other work in pop culture, and I'd love to just get to know, but I also think I'll really enjoy because I love reading myths from various cultures. I love being introduced to mythologies, and I also love seeing the overlap between other cultures' myths and ancient Greek myths. I think that's a lot of fun as well, so I have had this on my shelf again for a few years and still haven't picked it up, so I really need to do that. Plus, I mean, is this not a stunning cover? This is published by Penguin, who did a whole like range of these editions for sort of northern mythological stories. Most of these characters I don't recognise, but we do have some poems in here about Loki, who you like me might know from Marvel, so it's going to be really fun to read some more original Norse myths and poems. I then have another collection of sort of fable-y type work, but this is more traditional fairy tales, and that is Hans Christian Andersen's collected fairy tales. This is like an old Wordsworth Classics edition that I picked from a chai shop, but I just loved the illustrations on this. Like, I just thought it was so lovely and traditional and classic fairy tale that I really wanted this edition specifically. I know there's probably much more ornate ones now. Now I have read a few of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales. I have read The Little Mermaid, I have read The Ugly Duckling, I have read The Tinderbox, I have read The Little Match Girl and The Snow Queen, and I might have read Red Shoes, or at least I've definitely come across others I haven't read in other areas of pop culture because they are some of the most well-known fairy tales. Hans Christian Andersen was a Danish folklorist and author working in the 1800s, and like I've already highlighted, you'll probably recognise some of his most famous works like Little Mermaid, which has had its Disney day and everything, but there are certainly fairy tales in this collection that I have never before read. There's some called The Elf Hill, A Picture from the Ramparts, The Bottleneck, The Angel, The Butterfly, The Snail and the Rosebush. I mean, I'm really interested in The Snail and the Rosebush, to be perfectly honest. The Girl Who Trod on a Loaf, The Nightingale, The Storks, and many others which I've never read before. So I would just love to read this whole collection and get a better idea of the vast array of folk tales that Hans Christian Andersen collected together and wrote down when he was alive. I then have another little bit of a cheat because it's 2 books. But it's because I keep getting a little bit confused between these 2 books. Now I picked these up a couple of years ago because my friend Jen has often talked about Peter Pan. She is very interested in the history of the Peter Pan story and has even filmed videos analysing Peter Pan and its history in the past. She has a channel which I will link down below. So she finally sort of got me wanting to read the originals and not just watch the Disney film, which I was familiar with from childhood, and I ended up picking up J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan books. But if you're not familiar, he wrote quite a few, so I think the first one that he wrote is in this collection, which is Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens and Peter and Wendy. But then we also have Peter Pan and Other Plays, so this is prose and then these are works for the stage. And I think this came later, but I am very willing to be corrected. I think this was always the one that I was meant to pick up first. I kind of just bought them both at once and then didn't read them, but would really like to. And then I can also have some really like interesting, in-depth, like well-rounded conversations with Jen in the future, so that'll be nice. But yeah, so I feel like Peter Pan is a story we all think we know, but it's actually more complicated than we think it is if we just know the sort of like generic 21st century version that a lot of us do. So these are the 2 Peter Pan books I have, plus J.M. Barrie is a Scottish author, so that would be quite fun to have read more classic Scottish literature. We then have a Gothic classic, and that is The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. So I really in general would like to read more classic Gothic pieces of literature, and this is one that just came up on a lot of lists of classic Gothic literature that influenced the genre, plus it's on the shorter side, and a lot of Gothic novels are quite chunky, I have noted. I've actually started a few in the past, managed to read like 100 pages and never finished them because they're so long, and also I maybe just haven't picked up the right ones, but I thought this could be a nice one to sort of reintroduce me to the genre and sort of widen my understanding of its tropes, because it's another one that sort of makes its way into lots of later literature. It makes its way into a lot of 1800s literature, a lot of 1900s literature. This one specifically was first published in the 1700s, which I think is when a lot of the like most well-known Gothic novels were released. I don't know exactly what it's about, but I imagine it covers a lot of the traditional Gothic tropes of like kidnapped women, adventure, dark castles, blah 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 blah, and all that stuff, so I'm looking forward to it. We then have one last author who I would really like to be better read in, and that is Robert Lee Stevenson. So Robert Lee Stevenson is probably one of the most famous Scottish writers, classic Scottish writers, and his most famous work is probably Treasure Island and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. However, the 2 I have in this collection here are Kidnapped and Katrina, which I would love to read both of. I'm just trying to like drag them out here. I've not opened this collection in a while, but we have them here, and these I actually won as a prize at school for writing in Scots. So there was like a Scots writing competition, and I wrote a story in Scots and then won the competition and won these books. So I have had these for goodness like 14, 16 years now, and I still haven't read them, and I really would love to. I think you just got to read things at the right time when you're really feeling it, and I definitely think in the past few years I've felt more and more drawn to reading more classic Scots literature and checking out more by Robert Louis Stevenson. So these are the 2 that I would like to sort of check out first and foremost, given how long I've had them. And if you've read either Kidnapped or Katrina and would recommend one over the other, do let me know. But it would be nice to finally finally crack these editions open, because otherwise they've just been sitting on my shelf for, like I mentioned, almost 2 decades. Those, however, are the top 10 classics or classic authors that I would like to read in the near future. I'd love to hear if you've read any of these, what you thought of them, whether you too would like to read them, or if there's just generally any classic authors that you want to read more of or want to start reading for one reason or another. Let me know in the comments down below, but until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye everyone!